Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the absolute roller coaster of a story surrounding a brilliant military mind whose career was suddenly and tragically snuffed out by an unbelievable deception. We're talking about Alexander Puzyerewski. It's a saga we can really only call the scholar-soldier's tragedy. And trust me, by the end of this explainer, you are going to know exactly why. This is a guy who literally wrote the book on military strategy. He climbed to the absolute zenith of the Russian Imperial Army and personally mentored some of the 20th century's most famous generals. But despite all that genius, his entire legacy was just shattered, completely dismantled by a betrayal happening right under his nose. And that brings us to the core mystery of our explainer today. How on earth does a brilliant military historian fall for a massive historic deception? It's a wild paradox, right? You'd think someone who spent decades analyzing the fatal tactical blunders of medieval kings and modern emperors would be the hardest person on the planet to fool. Puzyerewski leaves behind this crazy dual legacy. On one hand, he was a universally respected genius, an absolute academic powerhouse. But on the other, he was the victim of a devastating career-ending betrayal. So as we walk through his life, keep this question in the back of your mind. How exactly does the ultimate expert become the ultimate victim? To understand how the expert becomes the victim, let's move to and see how this builds from his very earliest days. Born back in 1845 in Bessarabia into a noble family, Puzyerewski didn't just study war in some cozy library, he lived it. By 1863, at just 18 years old, he's already seeing his first combat action during the January Uprising. His ascent was incredibly rapid. Fast forward to 1877, and he's out there actively earning a fierce reputation on the battlefield during the Russo-Turkish War. That exact trajectory is what ultimately launches him to the highly prestigious Warsaw Command by 1890. So we're tracing the rise of a man who truly proved himself in the mud and the trenches way before he ever sat down behind a general's desk. To really grasp his credibility, you've got to understand his intense combat experience during the Russo-Turkish War between 1877 and 1878. Puzyerewski was the chief of staff for the advanced guard under the legendary general Yusuf Gurko. We are talking about direct, boots-on-the-ground involvement in major pivotal engagements. Battles like Gorny Dubnik, the grueling blockade of Plevna, and that massive three-day clash at Philippopolis. He wasn't just sitting back observing. He was actively shaping the tactics that won those fights. He walked away with 3 separate orders for bravery and a promotion to colonel. I want to emphasize this because it absolutely proves he was a practical, battle-tested strategist. He understood the chaos of the front line, which honestly makes his later administrative blindness so much more shocking. Okay, let's dive into this incredible pivot in his career. After proving himself in combat from 1879 to 1889, Puzyerewski transitions into what we could easily call his intellectual zenith. He becomes a professor at the General Staff Academy. So now he's no longer just executing military art out in the field, he's actually defining and teaching it. In fact, his expertise was so highly regarded that he was personally instructing Tsar Alexander III. Think about that for a second. He was teaching the emperor himself about military art and cavalry tactics. That is the ultimate validation of his intellect. He's literally shaping the strategic minds of the entire Russian Empire from the very top down. And his academic output during this time? Simply staggering. His expertise wasn't just boxed into one specific era or one style of warfare. Each of his publications acted as a stepping stone that built this formidable, almost untouchable reputation. In 1882, he's breaking down the 30 Years' War. Jump to 1884, and he's publishing a massive, comprehensive history of military art in the Middle Ages. Then, he pivots to tackle more modern, localized conflicts, like the Polish-Russian War of 1831, and even puts out his own strategic memoirs from the Russo-Turkish War. He was a universal scholar of conflict. His works were so influential, they were actively being translated into German, French, and Polish.
But you know what's particularly fascinating about his scholarly work? It's his strict, unwavering commitment to historical objectivity. For instance, he openly provided a really flattering assessment of the attack of the Polish light cavalry at Somosierra in 1808. Now, why does that matter to us? Well, if you consider the intense historical and political tensions between Russia and Poland at the time, a Russian imperial general openly praising the brilliance of Polish forces, that shows a deep, uncompromised dedication to the facts. He analyzed military history neutrally and impartially. He prioritized tactical truth over any sort of political bias. Basically, he respected good military execution no matter whose flag was flying. And this brings us to a major transition in his life. Young, ambitious officers, guys like Anton Denikin, who you might know later became a highly prominent Russian general, were cutting their teeth in units like the 2nd Artillery Brigade in Biała Podlaska. That was right under the umbrella of the Warsaw Military District. And guess who was running that district's staff? Alexander Puzyriewski. He had moved out of the academic halls of St. Petersburg and stepped right into the absolute pinnacle of administrative and operational command in Warsaw. He was there, mentoring and shaping the entire next generation of military leaders.
So in January 1890, he is officially appointed Chief of Staff of the Warsaw Military District. He later reaches the absolute height of the military hierarchy when he's promoted to infantry general in 1901. This was a massive, incredibly prestigious posting. The Warsaw District was a crucial, heavily militarized zone right on the western border. They were constantly prepping for potential conflicts with Germany and Austro-Hungary. But tragically, this exact promotion set the stage for his eventual ruin. It shifted his daily focus away from the clear, objective study of history and dropped him right into the murky, highly deceptive world of high-level military administration and intelligence. And right there in that murky world, we meet the architect of Puzyriewski's downfall, a man named Anatoly Grimm. Grimm was an officer within the Warsaw Military District, and Puzyriewski trusted him completely. In fact, Puzyriewski actively promoted him to colonel and made him an operations officer, all based on the supposedly amazing intelligence Grimm was bringing in. But the dramatic, totally devastating irony here? Grimm was secretly acting as a spy for the German Empire. It's wild. The brilliant scholar who could see straight through the fog of centuries-old battles was completely blind to the traitor operating right inside his own headquarters.
Now, what's really interesting about this setup is the sheer unbelievable scale of the manipulation. Puzyriewski fully believed Grimm was this master intelligence gatherer, handing over top-secret German vulnerabilities and authentic enemy war plans. Puzyriewski was taking these documents and proudly passing them right up the chain to the Russian general staff. But in reality, Grimm was feeding him completely fabricated German strategies. And it gets worse. Because Puzyriewski had given him such high-level access, Grimm was simultaneously stealing the real Russian mobilization plans. We're talking highly sensitive stuff, including joint attack plans with the French army, and he was handing them straight to the Germans. It was a fatal case of administrative blindness.
When the truth finally came to light, the fallout was absolutely catastrophic. Let's pace through this domino effect real quick. The deception was actually uncovered in 1902 by Austrian Colonel Alfred Redl, which, by the way, is incredibly ironic because Redl was a famous Russian spy himself. But once Grimm was exposed, international espionage repercussions erupted immediately. The Russian general staff experienced this massive shockwave. They suddenly realized their entire defensive and offensive strategies were fully compromised, based entirely on lies. They had to frantically revise all their war plans. And for our scholar-soldier, the disgrace was total. Puzyriewski's lifelong, glittering career was shattered in an instant, and he was sent on forced leave in March 1902. Just 2 short years after his career completely collapsed, Alexander Puzyriewski died on May 10, 1904. He was buried in the Orthodox Cemetery in Warsaw. It is such a somber, sudden end for a man who literally spent his entire life analyzing the triumphs and defeats of others. So, we're going to end this explainer with a final thought for you to chew on. How exactly does history judge a lifelong scholar, a decorated war hero, and a brilliant military mind when their entire legacy is eclipsed by one fatal error in trusting the wrong person? Does the brilliance of the historian survive the blindness of the administrator? It is a fascinating question about legacy, deception, and human flaw. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.